Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror after a fit of rage and not recognized the person staring back at you? It could be during an argument with a loved one, in a traffic jam, or in an anonymous online comment. Suddenly, a cold, piercing cruelty erupts from you. It was your voice, but the words felt foreign, malicious. Then, as the anger subsides, a cold sweat and shame set in. Who was that? Was that really me? We love to divide the world into good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains, us and them. We find comfort in thinking that evil is something external, that monsters are a special breed of people, bad apples born with a defective soul. And we, of course, are not like them. We are the good ones. But what if this convenient worldview is a lie? What if the line between good and evil isn't an impenetrable wall, but merely a thin line in the sand that any of us can cross at any moment without even noticing? Psychologist Philip Zimbardo asked himself this terrifying question. The answer he found through his famous and chilling experiment should make each of us fear not the monsters on the news, but the monster that sleeps within ourselves. He called it the Lucifer effect, after God's favorite angel who became the devil. And he proved that to turn a good, normal, mentally healthy person into a monster, you don't need to change their soul, you just need to change their situation. For this, we must descend into the basement of Stanford University, where a portal to hell was opened in the summer of 1971. Imagine you're a college student in the summer of 1971. You see a flyer, volunteers needed for a psychological study of prison life, $15 a day. Easy money, an interesting experience. Why not? You pass the tests. You are completely normal, mentally healthy, well-adjusted, with no criminal record. Most of you are pacifists, flower children protesting the Vietnam War. You and 23 other young men are gathered in the basement of Stanford University, which has been converted into a makeshift prison. A simple coin toss decides your fate for the next 2 weeks. You are either a guard or a prisoner. What happened next was supposed to be a routine scientific study. Instead, it became one of the most horrifying journeys into the dark heart of human nature. The guards were given uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses that completely hid their eyes, creating anonymity. The prisoners were stripped naked, sprayed with a disinfectant, and made to wear simple smocks with no underwear, stocking caps, and chains on their ankles. They were assigned numbers instead of names. The experiment was scheduled to last 14 days. It was stopped after 6. Because in those 6 days, ordinary American college students, pacifists, transformed into sadists, and their broken, passive victims. The guards, given complete authority, started small. They made prisoners do push-ups for minor infractions. Then they deprived them of sleep, waking them at night for humiliating roll calls. They forced them to clean toilets with their bare hands. They invented ever more creative forms of psychological torture that no one had ordered them to use. They did it with apparent pleasure. The prisoners initially tried to rebel, but their rebellion was brutally crushed, and then they broke. They fell into depression and began to suffer from acute psychological breakdowns. One screamed hysterically, begging to be released. Another went on a hunger strike and was locked in a tiny closet, the solitary confinement cell. Even Zimbardo himself, the head of the experiment, fell into the trap. He ceased to be a scientist and became a prison superintendent, more concerned with the security of his facility than the well-being of his subjects. What happened in that basement? Were these students latent monsters just waiting for their moment, or did the prison itself create the monsters? Zimbardo argues it wasn't a problem of bad apples, it was a problem of a bad barrel. And this barrel has 3 toxic ingredients. Zimbardo stopped the experiment when his fiancée, also a psychologist, came to observe and told him in horror, "What you are doing to these boys is terrible." He suddenly saw the situation through her eyes and realized he had become part of the monstrous system himself. Analyzing the events, he identified 3 key poisons, 3 systemic elements that turned good people into monsters. And these poisons surround us every day. The first poison, anonymity and uniforms. As soon as the guards put on the mirrored sunglasses and the prisoners were given numbers, they ceased to be John and Mike. They became functions, roles. The glasses hid their eyes, the mirror of the soul, creating a barrier. The guard no longer saw a person in the prisoner, he saw an object, a problem to be controlled. The prisoners, stripped of their names and hair, felt depersonalized. They began to believe they were just number 899. Think about the internet, an anonymous username, an avatar instead of a face. These are the same mirrored sunglasses. They allow us to write things we would never dare say to someone's face. They strip us of accountability. The second poison, unchecked power. The guards were told, you can do whatever is necessary to maintain order except for physical violence. This was a blank check, no clear rules, no oversight. Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Stanford prison proved this in 6 days. When a person is given power over another and knows there will be no consequences, their inner sadist gets a green light. This doesn't just happen in prisons. It happens in offices where a tyrannical boss humiliates subordinates, and in families where one partner holds complete financial or emotional power. The third poison, dehumanization. This is the most insidious mechanism. To torture someone without remorse, you must first stop seeing them as a human being. You must turn them into a label. Prisoner, enemy of the people, liberal, conservative, immigrant, infidel. Once we apply a label to a group of people, we switch off our empathy. They cease to be individuals with hopes, fears, and families. They become an abstraction, a problem. Insects to be crushed. The Nazis called Jews rats. In Rwanda, the Hutu called the Tutsi cockroaches. Language is the first step toward genocide, and this same mechanism of dehumanization is at work in online bullying, when we forget that behind the avatar is a living person. These 3 poisons created a perfect storm in the Stanford basement. But to understand how this works, not in a lab, but on the scale of an entire nation, we must travel from 1970s California to a courtroom in 1960s Jerusalem, where a man responsible for the deaths of millions was on trial. In 1961, the world watched the trial of Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, an SS officer responsible for the logistics of the final solution to the Jewish question. He sent millions of men, women, and children to death camps. Everyone expected to see a monster in the courtroom, a demon incarnate, a fanatic with eyes burning with hatred. But the man in the dock was someone else entirely, a small, balding, unremarkable bureaucrat in glasses. He didn't shout about racial supremacy. He spoke quietly, in bureaucratic jargon, about delivery schedules, throughput capacity, and process optimization. He looked less like a sadist and more like a boring middle manager. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial for The New Yorker, was stunned. She realized she was facing a new, previously unknown type of evil. She called it the banality of evil. Eichmann was not a pathological hater. He did not derive pleasure from suffering. He was simply doing his job well. He was a careerist. His primary goal was not the extermination of Jews, but career advancement. He was proud of how efficiently he had organized the train transports. The fact that the cars were filled with people being sent to their deaths was, to him, merely a technical detail. The evil he committed was monstrous. But he himself was terrifyingly normal. He was banal. Hannah Arendt drew a conclusion more frightening than any horror movie. The greatest evils in the world are not committed by villains. They are committed by ordinary people who refuse to think. People who simply follow orders. Who accept the system's ideology without question. Evil is not a passion, evil is the absence of thought. Eichmann was a product of the same bad barrel as the Stanford guards. The system gave him power, a uniform, and an ideology that dehumanized an entire people. And he simply switched off his capacity for critical thinking. He stopped seeing people as people. He saw only numbers and reports. This brings us to the most crucial question. What exactly shuts down in our brains when we find ourselves in such a situation? Why does empathy, our primary moral compass, suddenly stop working? Since the time of Zimbardo and Arendt, neuroscience has made great strides. We can now literally look inside a person's brain and see what happens when they obey a cruel order or follow the crowd. And what we see there confirms our worst fears. Our brains contain what is known as the empathy network. These are areas that activate when we witness another person's pain. When you see someone cut their finger, your brain momentarily simulates that pain. You literally feel another suffering. This is the foundation of our morality. But research shows that this network can be turned off, like a light switch in a room. In one experiment, participants were shown videos of homeless people. When told to simply watch, their empathy network was active. But when they were tasked with counting how many times the person in the video blinks, the empathy network shut down. The brain switched from feeling mode to analyzing mode. The person was transformed from an individual into an object to be counted. Now, imagine a concentration camp guard or a bureaucrat like Eichmann. His job is not to empathize, but to fulfill quotas, count, and organize. The system itself compels his brain to turn off empathy in order to be efficient. Another mechanism is obedience to authority. Stanley Milgram's experiment, conducted even before Zimbardo's, proved this with horrifying clarity. Ordinary people were willing to administer seemingly lethal electric shocks to a stranger if a man in a white lab coat told them, "Please continue, I am responsible." When we transfer responsibility to an authority figure, the activity in the brain areas associated with guilt and personal choice decreases. We seem to enter an agentic state. We no longer feel like the authors of our own actions. We are merely instruments in someone else's hands. Ideology, anonymity, power, and obedience to authority all act as a powerful anesthetic for our conscience. This doesn't mean we become monsters who enjoy evil. It's much worse. We become robots who cease to distinguish between good and evil. We continue to see ourselves as good people just doing our jobs. And this leads us to the most difficult question. If the system is so powerful, if it can hack our brains and turn off our humanity, do we even stand a chance? Or are we all doomed to become cogs in someone's evil machine? It seems the conclusion from all this is one of complete pessimism. If the environment determines everything, then we are just puppets. But Philip Zimbardo himself argues the opposite. Yes, the system is powerful, but it is not all-powerful. The antidote to the banality of evil is the banality of heroism. What is heroism in this context? It's not about throwing yourself on a grenade. It's not the ability to fly. Heroism, according to Zimbardo, is a social act. It is the ability of one person to say no when everyone else is saying yes. There was such a potential hero in the Stanford experiment. It was Christina Maslach, Zimbardo's fiancée, who came in and said, "This is wrong." She was the only person out of more than 50 who saw the horror and did not fall under the influence of the prison logic. She was an outsider. She looked at the situation with fresh eyes and pulled the emergency brake. A hero is someone who is not afraid to be the odd one out, someone who is willing to sacrifice their comfort and status within the group to stand up for what is right. Zimbardo analyzes why some people succumb to pressure while others do not. He identifies several key traits of a potential hero. First, they are people who act based on their internal values, not on the need for group approval. It is more important for them to be right in their own eyes than to be popular in the eyes of others. Second, they are people who know how to take responsibility. They don't say, "It's not my business," or "I was just following orders." They say, "This is happening on my watch, so it is my responsibility." And third, most importantly, it's a skill. Heroism is not an innate character trait. It is a muscle that can and must be trained. You cannot prepare for one single grand heroic act, but you can prepare for it every day by committing small acts of defiance against evil, not laughing at a racist joke when everyone else is, standing up for a colleague who is being unfairly criticized, speaking the truth when it would be easier to remain silent. Every such small act is a workout for your dissent muscle, and if you train it every day, then in that critical moment when the system tries to turn you into a monster, you will have the strength to say no. So we know the enemy, the system, the situation. We know the weapon, awareness and heroism. But how do we turn this knowledge into daily practice? How can we inoculate ourselves against the Lucifer effect? Here are 3 specific tools. Tool 1, never lose your name. Remember how the prisoners were stripped of their names and given numbers? That was the first step toward breaking them. Your identity, your name, your unique story. This is your primary shield against de-individuation. Practice conscious individuality. Resist the anonymity of the crowd. When you write a comment online, write it as if your real name were attached. If you are in a large organization, at work, in the military, in a political party, do not let the uniform or corporate culture completely erase your personality. Ask yourself, is this me, John Smith, speaking, or is this my role as manager speaking? Maintain a critical distance. Tool 2. Develop an allergy to dehumanization. Our brains are lazy. It's easier to operate with labels than with complex individuals. Learn to recognize this dangerous language and resist it internally. Every time you hear an entire group of people referred to by a single derogatory term, libtards, rednecks, migrants, the elite, your internal alarm bell should go off. Ask yourself, who are these people really? They are millions of different individuals with their own families, hopes, and fears. Force your brain to see the person behind the label. It's energy intensive, but this is the work of maintaining your humanity. Tool 3, train your dissent muscle. Heroism is a skill, and like any skill, it requires practice. Start small. If you're served cold soup at a restaurant, politely but firmly ask for it to be replaced. If a friend is gossiping, say, "Listen, I'm not comfortable discussing this behind their back." If everyone at a meeting agrees with an obviously foolish idea, be the one to ask the uncomfortable question. Every time you go against the grain in a small way, you strengthen your ability to resist it in a big way. You learn to handle the social discomfort that always accompanies dissent. You are preparing yourself for the day when your no could save someone's career, reputation, or even their life. These tools won't make you invincible, but they will increase your chances of remaining human when the barrel around you begins to rot. We began this conversation with a frightening question. What if I'm not a good person? What if, deep inside me, a monster is sleeping, just waiting for the right situation to awaken? After everything we've learned about prisons, bureaucrats, and electric shocks, the answer might surprise you. You are not a good person. But you are not a bad one either. You are both. You are a battlefield. True virtue is not saintly purity. It is not the absence of darkness within you. It is the knowledge that this darkness exists, and the conscious, daily, exhausting choice in favor of the light. Ignoring your inner villain, pretending it doesn't exist, is the most dangerous thing you can do, because an unacknowledged shadow controls you from the underground. It dictates your outbursts of anger, your irrational fears, your blind rage. But the moment you look it in the eye, the moment you say, "Yes, I know you're here. I know what I'm capable of on a bad day in a bad situation," you take away its power. You put it on a leash. Acknowledging your inner Stanford guard is the only way to never become one. The Lucifer effect is not a sentence. It is a warning. It is a call to eternal vigilance, a call to ask yourself every day, who am I right now? A person or a function? An individual or part of a crowd? The line between good and evil truly runs through every human heart. And your greatest task in life is not to erase that line, but to choose every single day which side of it you will stand on.